Have you ever really thought about how we study something as basic as language? I mean, it's just there. We use it every day. But back in the 20th century, one single revolutionary idea came along and completely changed the game. It sparked this incredible wave of new thinking that honestly built the foundation for linguistics as we know it today.
So let's just dive right in. The big question, the one that linguists have wrestled with forever, is this. How should we actually study language, right? Do we treat it like some ancient artifact you'd find in a museum? Or is it more like a living, breathing thing?
For a really, really long time, the main approach was all about history. Linguists would spend their time tracing words back to their ancient roots, mapping out how languages changed and evolved over hundreds of years. It was all about the past. But then a few folks started to wonder if maybe they were missing the bigger picture, kind of missing the living, breathing language for its dusty, ancient roots. And that led to this huge shift in thinking. Instead of what they called a diachronic approach, looking at language through time, a brand new idea popped up, a synchronic approach. The whole goal was to analyze language as a complete working system, right here, right now. Think of it like this. Instead of watching a long historical documentary, you're taking a single, crystal clear snapshot. Now, the guy behind this massive shift was Ferdinand de Saussure, and his big idea was called structuralism. He basically said, look, language isn't just a big list of words with historical footnotes. It's a structured system. A system where every single piece, every sound, every word only gets its meaning because of how it relates to all the other pieces. All of a sudden, the focus wasn't on where a word came from, but what it was doing inside the system right now. This idea was just so radical, it couldn't be contained. And its very first champions were actually Saussure's own students. They formed what we now call the Geneva School. You can think of them as the direct heirs to the throne, the ones who kept that original fire going. Here's a wild fact. Saussure himself never actually published his big groundbreaking work. After he died, it was his students, guys like Charles Bawley and Albert Sachet, who gathered up all their old lecture notes and compiled them into the book that became the cornerstone of structuralism. They literally took up his mantle. And their mission, really, was to make sure this revolutionary new way of thinking wasn't just some passing fad. They wanted to make it the new foundation for the entire field. So, when you boil it down, the Geneva School's main contribution was to solidify everything. They championed that synchronic approach, hammering home the idea that to really understand a language, you have to look at the incredibly complex web of relationships connecting all its parts at one specific moment in time. Okay, so while the Geneva School was busy preserving Saussure's original legacy, another group over in Denmark was taking his ideas in a much more abstract, almost mathematical direction. These were the formalists of the Copenhagen School. This group, led by thinkers like Louis Helmslöv and Viggo Brandl, had this grand ambition. They wanted to create a universal model of language, a formal system so pure it could describe the underlying structure of any language on Earth. They basically wanted to strip away all the messy real-world stuff to find the clean, beautiful logic underneath. At their core, they believed language could be and should be studied as this pure, self-contained system. For them, things like social situations or psychology, that was all just external noise. The real prize was the abstract structure itself. It's kind of like they wanted to study the immutable rules of chess, not watch a chaotic game being played by a couple of amateurs in the park. And to do this, Helmslöv came up with a theory he called Glossematics. He broke language down into two basic levels. You have the plane of expression, that's the sounds and the symbols, the stuff you actually see and hear. And then you have the plane of content, that's the meaning, the ideas those symbols are pointing to. But, not everyone was on board with separating language from its purpose. Over in Prague, another group of linguists took structuralism in a totally different direction. They were the functionalists, and they asked a really simple but profound question. Why is language structured the way it is in the first place? Figures like Nikolai Trubetskoy and Roman Jakobson, they agreed with the Copenhagen guys that, language is a system, for sure. But for them, it was not an abstract system. They believed its design wasn't arbitrary at all. For the Prague School, it was all about this. Structure is shaped by its function. The way a language is built is directly tied to the jobs it has to do. Expressing ideas, trying to persuade people, sharing emotions. It's a classic case of form follows function. Their biggest breakthrough came in phonology, the study of sound systems. They pioneered this idea of distinctive features. They argued that we should analyze sounds based on their functional differences. So, for example, the difference between the sound P and B in English, it isn't just a random acoustic quirk. It's a functional contrast we call voicing, and that tiny little difference is what allows us to tell pat from bat. It's brilliant. So the Prague School brought the why back into the conversation. But our last school over in London, they took it even one step further. They started asking not just why, but also where and with whom. They put the focus squarely on how language actually works in society. Over in Britain, linguists like J.R. Firth and later Firth and Halliday basically argued that you can't really understand language if you just treat it like an abstract system on a piece of paper. You have to go out and look at it in action, right in the middle of its social context. Their mantra was super simple. Language is, first and foremost, a social phenomenon. Meaning isn't just hiding inside the words themselves. It's something that gets created in the moment, in a specific situation, between real people. And this whole idea led to something called systemic functional grammar, which sees language as a social semiotic system. Okay, I know that sounds fancy. But it's really just a way of saying that structure, meaning, and social context are all like threads woven together to make the fabric of language. You can't just pull one thread out without the whole thing starting to unravel. So, there we have it. We started with one core idea from Saussure, and we watched it splinter into 4 very distinct, very powerful branches. Let's try to bring it all back together and just take a look at the rich tapestry they created. All right, let's do a quick recap. We started with the Geneva School, right? The keepers of the flame who preserved Saussure's synchronic legacy. Then we jumped to the Copenhagen School, who were chasing this pure, formal, abstract science of language. In response to that, the Prague School came along and reconnected structure to its function. And finally, the London School took all of that and embedded it firmly in social context. 4 schools, 4 totally unique takes on one revolutionary idea. And the impact of this whole structuralist revolution? It was massive. I mean, it basically turned linguistics from what was largely a historical hobby into a proper scientific discipline. You can see its influence everywhere today, in how we analyze sound systems, grammar, meaning, you name it. It showed us all that language isn't just chaos. It's an organized, dynamic, and deeply, deeply human system. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The very fact that Saussure's single idea could blossom into so many different and yet all valid approaches, well, that tells us something fundamental. It shows that language itself isn't just one thing. It's an abstract system, and it's a functional tool, and it's a social reality, all at the exact same time.